They say money can't buy happiness, but it can certainly buy justice. When Derek Moore handed his wife divorce papers, he thought he had won. He had the high-priced lawyers, the hidden assets, and worst of all, he had taken her children. He left Charlotte with nothing but the clothes on her back and a broken heart. He thought she was weak. He thought she was alone, but Derek forgot one crucial detail. Charlotte's last name wasn't just Moore. It was Dalton. And her estranged father wasn't just rich. He was the kind of man who didn't just hire lawyers, he bought them. Watch what happens when a narcissist realizes he's playing a game he's already lost. The silence in the house was the first warning, though Charlotte Moore didn't realize it at the time. It was a Tuesday in mid-November, the kind of Chicago afternoon where the sky turns the color of a bruised plum, and the wind off Lake Michigan feels like it's trying to cut through the glass. Charlotte unbuttoned her beige trench coat, shaking off the melting sleet, and keyed in the code to the alarm system. "Kids, Derek," she called out. Usually at 5:30 p.m., the house was a chaotic symphony of life. 7-year-old Leo would be building Lego towers in the hallway, and 4-year-old Sophie would be watching cartoons at a volume that rattled the windows. But today the hallway was pristine. The Legos were gone. The TV was off. A knot, tight and cold, formed in Charlotte's stomach. She walked into the kitchen. On the granite island, a renovation they had argued about for months, before finally financing it, sat a single white envelope. Next to it was her wedding ring. Charlotte froze. The air in the house suddenly felt too thin to breathe. She reached out her hand, trembling, and picked up the ring. It was cold against her skin. She looked at the envelope. It had her name on it, typed, not handwritten. She ripped it open. It wasn't a letter. It was a petition for dissolution of marriage. Petitioner Derek Andrew Moore. Respondent Charlotte Marie Moore. And then the paragraph that made her knees buckle, request for emergency temporary custody granted. "No," she whispered the sound, barely escaping her throat. "No, no, no." She scrambled for her phone, dialing Derek. Straight to voicemail. She dialed again. Voicemail. She called her mother-in-law a woman who had always treated Charlotte with a passive-aggressive sweetness. "Hello?" The voice was clipped. "Linda, where are the kids?" "Derek isn't answering and there are papers. Please do not contact this number again, Charlotte," Linda said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "All communication must go through Derek's attorney, Mr. Gavin O'Connell." "Linda, wait. Where are Leo and Sophie?" Click. Charlotte dropped the phone. Panic, raw and animalistic, clawed at her throat. She ran up the stairs, tripping over the top step, and burst into the children's rooms. Empty. Not just tidy empty. The closets were bare. The drawers were open and hollow. Sophie's favorite stuffed rabbit, a ragged thing she couldn't sleep without, was gone. Derek hadn't just left. He had erased them. She ran back downstairs, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She grabbed her car keys, intending to drive to Linda's house, to the police station, anywhere. But as she reached the front door, it swung open. 2 uniformed officers stood there. Behind them, leaning against his sleek black Audi Q8, was Derek. He didn't look sad. He didn't look angry. He looked bored. He was checking his watch, a Rolex Submariner she had saved for 2 years to buy him for his promotion. "Ma'am," the older officer said, stepping forward. "We have a court order here regarding the premises." "He took my children," Charlotte screamed, pointing at Derek. "Arrest him. He kidnapped them." Derek didn't flinch. He simply smoothed the lapel of his charcoal wool coat. "Officer," Derek said calmly, his voice smooth as oil. "As the court order states, Mrs. Moore has been exhibiting erratic, unstable behavior. For the safety of the children, Judge Anthony Brannigan granted the emergency motion this morning." "Liar!" Charlotte lunged, but the officer caught her arm. "I picked them up from school yesterday. I made them pancakes this morning. I am not unstable." "You're making a scene, Charlotte," Derek said, finally looking at her. His eyes were dead void of the 10 years of history they shared. "This is exactly what I told the judge about. The mood swings. The aggression." "Ma'am," the officer said firmly, "this is an order of exclusive possession. Mr. Moore has been granted possession of the marital residence. You have 15 minutes to gather personal essentials and vacate." "Vacate," Charlotte choked out. "This is my house. My name is on the deed." "It's a court order, ma'am. If you refuse, we'll have to arrest you for trespassing." Charlotte looked from the stone-faced officers to Derek. He offered her a small, pitying smile, the kind you give a dog before you put it down. "Don't worry, Char," Derek said softly. "I packed a bag for you. It's on the porch. I even put your anxiety meds in there. You look like you need them." He hadn't packed a bag. He had thrown a pile of clothes into a garbage bag and left it sitting in the slush. 10 minutes later, Charlotte stood on the sidewalk, the sleet soaking through her coat, watching the heavy oak door slam shut. The lock clicked. Through the window she saw Derek pick up his phone, laughing as he answered a call. She checked her bank app. Checking account $0, savings account $0, credit card declined. He had drained everything. The next 48 hours were a blur of cheap motel rooms and panic attacks. Charlotte had pawned her earrings, the only jewelry she had on her, when she was kicked out to pay for 2 nights at a Motel 6 on the outskirts of the city. She had spent the entire time calling lawyers. The conversations were all identical. "I need to fight an emergency custody order," she would say, her voice shaking. "Okay, our retainer fee is $5,000, the receptionist would reply. I don't have access to my funds right now. My husband froze them." "I'm sorry we can't help you without a retainer. Try legal aid." Legal aid had a 6-week waiting list. She didn't have 6 weeks. She didn't have 6 hours. She hadn't seen Leo or Sophie in 2 days. On Thursday morning, staring at the water stains on the motel ceiling, Charlotte remembered a name Derek had mentioned once years ago when he was bragging about his company's legal team. Gavin O'Connell. She Googled him. Gavin T. O'Connell, senior partner at O'Connell, Stearns and Associates. The divorce shark of Chicago. Win rate 98%. This was who Derek had hired. A man who charged $800 an hour to destroy lives. Charlotte put on her only clean blouse, tried to tame her frizzy hair in the cracked motel mirror, and drove her 10-year-old Honda Civic to the downtown courthouse. There was a hearing scheduled for 10 a.m. She hadn't been served officially, but she had found the docket number on the papers Derek left. The courtroom was intimidating, paneled in dark mahogany that smelled of old polish and fear. When Charlotte walked in, Derek was already there. He was sitting at the plaintiff's table, whispering to a man who looked like he was carved out of granite. Gavin O'Connell was terrifyingly handsome in a way that suggested he lacked a soul. He wore a navy bespoke suit, a silk pocket square, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Moore," Judge Brannigan said, looking over his spectacles. "You're appearing pro se. I don't have a lawyer, Your Honor," Charlotte stammered, gripping the podium until her knuckles turned white. "My husband took all our money. He locked me out of the house." "Objection," O'Connell said. He didn't even stand up. He just leaned back, twirling a Mont Blanc pen. "Mr. Moore secured the assets to prevent dissipation. Mrs. Moore has a history of impulsive spending during her manic episodes." "That is a lie," Charlotte shouted. "I bought groceries, I paid the mortgage." "Your Honor, O'Connell continued, his voice smooth and bored. "We have affidavits here from Mrs. Moore's neighbours alleging screaming matches. We have bank statements showing erratic withdrawals. And we have a witness statement from a Mrs. Sasha Miller, a close family friend, who attests to seeing Mrs. Moore shake the children violently." Charlotte felt the room spin. Sasha Miller. Sasha was the intern Derek had hired 6 months ago, the one who came over for dinner, the one Charlotte had mentored, the one who smiled too much. "She's lying," Charlotte whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "She's sleeping with him. That's why she's saying this." Judge Brannigan sighed, rubbing his temples. "Mrs. Moore, these are serious allegations. Without counsel and without evidence to the contrary, I have to err on the side of caution for the children." "But I'm their mother. The temporary orders stand." The judge banged his gavel. "Mr. Moore retains sole physical custody. Mrs. Moore is granted supervised visitation for 1 hour a week to be conducted at the O'Connell Center. Next hearing in 30 days. 30 days! Charlotte screamed. "I can't see my kids for 30 days. 1 hour a week, Mum. Step down." Charlotte stood frozen. She looked at Derek. He was suppressing a grin. Sasha Miller walked into the courtroom, then wearing a tight pencil skirt, and placed a hand on Derek's shoulder. She looked at Charlotte and winked. It was the wink that broke her. Charlotte stumbled out of the courtroom, the heavy doors closing behind her, with a sound like a tomb sealing shut. She walked blindly through the corridors, ignoring the bustle of lawyers and clerks. She made it to the bathroom just before she threw up. She washed her face with cold water, staring at the ghost in the mirror. Dark circles, pale skin, hopeless eyes. Derek had won. He had the money, the lawyer, the judge, and the girl. He had planned this for months. She walked out of the courthouse and sat on a bench in the freezing wind. She had $43 in her pocket. No home, no kids. She pulled out her phone. She scrolled past her friends who had stopped answering her texts once Derek spun his narrative. She scrolled past her colleagues. Her thumb hovered over a number she hadn't called in 12 years. Contact him. She had vowed never to call him. Not after he missed her graduation. Not after he forgot her wedding. Not after he told her that marrying a middle management nobody like Derek was a waste of her potential. Robert Dalton, the mining tycoon, the man who owned half of Nevada and a good chunk of the Senate. A man so cold he made Derek look like a teddy bear. But Robert Dalton hated one thing more than disobedience losing, and his daughter was losing. Charlotte's hand shook violently. She pressed the call button. It rang once, twice, 3 times. "Speak," a gravelly voice answered. No hello, no niceties, just a command. "Dad," Charlotte whispered, her voice cracking. "It's Charlie." Silence. For a long, agonizing 5 seconds, there was only the sound of static. "I told you," Robert Dalton said, his voice devoid of emotion, "that I wouldn't bail you out when that mediocrity of a husband failed you. He didn't just fail me," Charlotte sobbed, the dam finally breaking. "He took the kids, Dad. He took Leo and Sophie. He took the house. He framed me. He left me with nothing. He took my grandchildren." The voice changed. The indifference vanished, replaced by a tone that sounded like heavy machinery grinding into gear. "Yes, he has a lawyer, Gavin O'Connell. They destroyed me in court today. I have no money to fight them." "O'Connell," Robert repeated the name. It wasn't a question. It was a target acquisition. "Where are you?" I'm on a bench outside the Cook County Courthouse." "Stay there. A car will be there in 4 minutes. Do not speak to anyone." "Dad, I don't need a ride. You need to shut up and listen, Charlotte. You called me. Now let me work." The line went dead. Charlotte lowered the phone, staring at the black screen. She didn't know if she had just made things better or infinitely worse. But as a sleek, armored Maybach pulled up to the curb exactly 4 minutes later, and a driver the size of a vending machine stepped out to open the door, she realized one thing. The war had just begun. The Maybach didn't take Charlotte to a hotel. It took her to the private airfield on the south side of the city. Numb Charlotte watched through tinted glass as the car rolled right onto the tarmac, stopping beside a Gulfstream G650 jet painted in matte black. The engines were already spooling a high-pitched whine that drowned out the wind. "Mr. Dalton is waiting on board, Mrs. Moore," the driver said, opening her door. Charlotte stepped out, clutching her purse, her only possession. She felt small. She felt like the failure her father had always predicted she would be. She walked up the stairs, the cabin attendant, nodding respectfully, and stepped into an interior that smelled of rich leather and aged scotch. Robert Dalton was sitting in a single armchair reading a file on a tablet. He was 65, but he looked 40. His hair was silver and cut with military precision. He wore a suit that cost more than Derek's car, and he didn't look up when she entered. "Sit," he commanded. Charlotte sat opposite him. She wanted to hug him, wanted to cry, but you didn't cry in front of Robert Dalton. You reported. "I'm sorry, Dad," she whispered. "You were right. About Derek. About everything." Robert finally looked up. His eyes were the same shade of icy blue as hers, but harder. "Apologies are a waste of oxygen, Charlotte. Fix the problem. That's what Daltons do." He slid the tablet across the table. "Look at it." Charlotte picked it up. It was a dossier, high-resolution photos, time stamps. Photo 1, Derek and Sasha Miller leaving a hotel in Miami, dated 3 months ago. Photo 2, Derek transferring funds into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Photo 3, a text message log between Derek and Gavin O'Connell, the lawyer. Derek: "She's clueless. If we trigger the breakdown in November, I can claim seasonal depression. Just make sure the prenup is shredded." O'Connell: "Consider it done. I'll draft the emergency custody order. We'll blindside her." Charlotte gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. You knew. How long have you known?" 3 months, Robert said calmly, taking a sip of his sparkling water. "I have alerts set up on all my children. When your husband started moving assets around, my team flagged it." "And you didn't tell me." Charlotte's voice rose, a mix of anger and betrayal. "You let him take my kids. You let him throw me on the street." "I let you hit bottom," Robert said, his voice dropping an octave. "Because as long as you were comfortable, you would have tried to work it out. You would have tried to be the nice wife. You would have settled for mediation." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. "You cannot mediate with a cancer, Charlotte. You cut it out. I needed you angry. I needed you desperate. Because now you are ready to do what needs to be done." "I just want my kids back," she wept. "You will get them back, and you will take everything else too." Robert tapped the intercom button. "Captain, wheels up. We're going to New York. My legal team is already assembled." "But the hearing is in Chicago," Charlotte said, confused. "The hearing is in Chicago," Robert agreed. "But the solution is in New York." He stood up and walked to a polished walnut cabinet. He pulled out a fresh change of clothes, a tailored Chanel suit, crisp and white. "Go to the back. Shower. Change. Burn those rags you're wearing," Robert ordered. "You look like a victim. When we land, you need to look like a Dalton." Charlotte took the clothes. She looked at her father, really looked at him for the first time in a decade. He wasn't a savior. He was a weapon. And finally, after all these years, he was pointing in the right direction. dad. Yes, destroy him. Robert Dalton smiled. It was a terrifying shark-like thing. Eat your lunch, Charlotte. We have a busy afternoon. Friday morning in Chicago was bright and deceptively cheerful. Inside the penthouse offices of O'Connell, Stearns and Associates, the mood was jubilant. Gavin O'Connell sat in his corner office, feet propped up on his mahogany desk, a crystal tumbler of scotch in his hand, despite it being 11 o'clock a.m. Across from him sat Derek Moore. To total victory. Gavin toasted, clinking his glass against Derek's. Derek laughed, loosening his tie. Did you see her face, Gavin? When the judge said supervised visitation, I thought she was going to faint. She's weak, Gavin scoffed. She came in pro se. Rookie mistake. We'll drag this out for 6 months. By the time we're done, she'll be begging to sign over full custody just to stop the legal bills she can't pay. What about her dad? Derek asked, a flicker of worry crossing his face. Robert Dalton. Gavin waved a dismissive hand. Estranged for 10 years. I checked. The old man hasn't spoken to her since the wedding. He's not going to swoop in now. Besides, even if he did, this is Illinois family court. His money can't change the law. God, I love hearing that. Derek grinned. Sasha is moving in tonight. I told the kids she's their new nanny for now. Smart. Establish the bond early. Makes it harder for Charlotte to argue. The intercom buzzed, cutting Gavin off. I said no interruptions, Brenda. Gavin snapped at the speaker. Mr. O'Connell. Brenda's voice was trembling. There are people here. What people, clients? Security. Brenda squeaked. And, oh my God. The heavy double doors to Gavin's office didn't open. They were thrown wide. 2 men in dark suits walked in first. They were massive, wide-shouldered, and silent. They took positions on either side of the door. Then Robert Dalton walked in. He didn't look like a man who belonged in a law office. He looked like he owned the building. He wore a charcoal 3-piece suit that cost more than Gavin's annual salary. Behind him walked Charlotte. Derek choked on his scotch. He scrambled to his feet, his face draining of color. Cha, what are you doing here? Charlotte didn't answer. She stood slightly behind her father, her white suit armor-plated perfection, her face an unreadable mask of ice. Gavin O'Connell dropped his feet from the desk, trying to regain his composure. He stood up, buttoning his jacket. This is a private office. Gavin barked, trying to summon his courtroom bravado. You can't just barge in here. I'll have you arrested for trespassing. Who the hell are you? Robert Dalton didn't shout. He walked to the center of the room and looked around with a look of mild distaste, as if he had stepped in something unpleasant. You must be Gavin, Robert said. I'm Robert Dalton. Gavin froze. The name hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Even he knew the name. Mr. Dalton. Gavin stammered, his arrogance evaporating. I wasn't aware you were involved in this matter. However, this is highly irregular. If you want to discuss a settlement for your daughter, you need to call my secretary and— I'm not here for a settlement, Robert interrupted. He pulled a single sheet of paper from his pocket and placed it gently on Gavin's desk. What is this? Gavin asked. That Robert said is the transfer of ownership deed for the building we are standing in. I bought it this morning. Cash. Gavin blinked. You bought the building. So what, we have a 10-year lease. You did, Robert corrected. But look at clause 14, B of your lease agreement. Change of ownership allows for immediate renegotiation of tenant terms if the tenant is found to be in violation of moral turpitude clauses. I haven't violated anything, Gavin shouted. We'll get to that, Robert said. He signaled to the door. A third man walked in. He was older, balding, and looked like he was about to have a heart attack. It was Martin Stearns, the Stearns in O'Connell, Stearns and Associates. Martin. Gavin looked at his partner confused. What is going on?" Martin Stearns couldn't look Gavin in the eye. He looked at the floor. "I'm sorry, Gavin. The offer, it was too good. He offered 3 times the valuation." "What offer?" Gavin screamed. Robert Dalton answered, "I didn't just buy the building, Gavin. I bought the firm. Or rather, I bought the controlling partnership interest. Mr. Stearns and the other 3 senior partners sold their shares to Dalton Holdings at 9:00 a.m. today." Robert walked around the desk, invading Gavin's personal space. "Which means," Robert whispered, "I am your boss. I own this desk. I own that chair. I own the file on my daughter's divorce." Derek Moore was backing away toward the corner, shaking his head. No, that's illegal. Conflict of interest." "Oh, it is definitely a conflict of interest," Robert agreed cheerfully, "which is why, as the new managing director of this firm, I am making some immediate personnel changes." Robert turned to Gavin. "You're fired." "You can't fire me. I'm a partner." "Not anymore. Read the bylaws. Majority vote can expel a partner for gross misconduct. And since I hold 60% of the shares as of this morning, and I say you are incompetent, you are gone. Your license, however, will be a matter for the Bar Association once I hand over the evidence of you bribing a judge in the Henderson case last year." Gavin went pale. "How did you—" "I know everything," Robert said. He pointed to the door. "Get out. Leave the phone and the laptop." Gavin O'Connell, the Shark of Chicago, grabbed his coat and fled the room without a word, pushing past the security guards. The room fell silent. Derek was left standing alone in the corner. He looked at Gavin's empty chair, then at Robert, and finally at Charlotte. He put on his best, charming husband smile. It looked grotesque. Derek said, his voice trembling. "Baby, look this. This got out of hand. Your dad. He's intense, huh? But we can talk. We don't need lawyers. We're family." Charlotte stepped forward. She walked right up to Derek. He flinched, expecting a slap. Instead, she smiled. It was the same smile her father had used. "We aren't family, Derek," she said softly. "You're just a trespassing stranger in my lawyer's office." She turned to her father. "Who is representing me now?" Robert Dalton gestured to Martin Stearns, the terrified remaining partner. "Mr. Stearns," Robert said, "you represent Mrs. Moore now. I expect you to file a motion to vacate the emergency order immediately, and I expect you to freeze all of Mr. Moore's assets, including the ones he tried to hide in the Caymans." "Yes, sir." "Absolutely, sir," Martin stammered. "I'll draft it right now." Robert turned his cold eyes to Derek. "Mr. Moore," Robert said, "you have 30 seconds to leave my building before I have security throw you through the window. And since I own the firm that represents you, consider yourself without legal counsel." Derek ran. He didn't look back. Charlotte watched him go. She felt a weight lift off her chest, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. "Is it over?" she asked. "No," Robert said, pulling out his phone. "That was just the opening move. Now we go get your children." The drive from the law firm to the Cook County Courthouse was short, but the silence inside the Maybach was heavy. Charlotte sat next to Martin Stearns, her new attorney, by force. The man was sweating profusely, dabbing his bald head with a handkerchief every 30 seconds. "Mr. Dalton." Stearns squeaked, looking at the billionaire sitting in the front passenger seat. "You must understand. Judge Brannigan is particular. He doesn't like having his rulings challenged on the same day. He's known for holding attorneys in contempt." Robert Dalton didn't turn around. He was scrolling through his phone. "Mr. Stearns, do you know who funds Brannigan's re-election campaigns?" Well, the local bar association usually. "And a super PAC called Justice for Illinois," Robert corrected, "which is a subsidiary of Dalton Enterprises. I don't just pay his campaign bills, Martin. I own the billboard his face is plastered on. The car screeched to a halt. Let's go have a chat with Anthony, Robert said, opening the door. Judge Anthony Brannigan was in his chambers, enjoying a pastrami sandwich and the feeling of a job well done. He had granted the Moore custody order as a favor to Gavin O'Connell, a favor that usually came with a nice consulting fee paid to his wife's charity. When the door to his chambers opened without a knock, Brannigan dropped his sandwich. "What is the meaning of this?" Brannigan bellowed, standing up. "This is a restricted area, bailiff." "The bailiff is outside," Robert Dalton said, walking in and closing the door. He locked it. "He's checking his new bank balance. Generous Christmas bonus this year." Brannigan's face turned purple. You are Robert Dalton." "I am. And this is my daughter Charlotte. The woman you decided was mentally unstable based on the word of an adulterous husband and a 24-year-old intern." Brannigan adjusted his robe, trying to regain his authority. "Mr. Dalton, while I respect your position in the business world, this is a court of law. The ruling stands. If you wish to appeal, file the paperwork and wait 30 days. "I don't have 30 days, Charlotte spoke up. Her voice was steady now. The fear was gone, burned away by the fire her father had lit. "My children are with a man who is actively liquidating assets to flee the country." "Conjecture," Brannigan scoffed. "Evidence," Robert said. He threw a folder onto the judge's desk. It slid across the mahogany and knocked over a framed photo of the judge and his wife. Brannigan opened the folder. His eyes widened. "That is a wire transfer request initiated by Derek Moore 30 minutes ago," Robert explained. "He's trying to move $400,000 to a bank in non-extradition territory. And this," Robert pointed to a second document, "is a flight manifest. 3 one-way tickets to Rio de Janeiro departing tonight at 8 p.m. Brannigan went pale. I didn't know." "Incompetence is a poor defense, Anthony," Robert said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Now here is what is going to happen. Mr. Stearns here has drafted a vacatur of emergency order and a writ of habeas corpus commanding the immediate return of the children to their mother. You are going to sign it." "I can't just reverse myself in 4 hours. It looks suspicious." Robert leaned over the desk. "You know what looks suspicious? The photos I have of you on Gavin O'Connell's yacht last summer. The one with the entertainment." Brannigan stopped breathing. The room was deadly silent. "Pen," Brannigan croaked. Martin Stearns scrambled to hand him a pen. The judge signed the orders, his hand shaking so badly the signature looked like a seismograph reading. "Thank you, Anthony," Robert said, snatching the papers. "And for the record, I'm pulling your funding. Enjoy retirement." Meanwhile, in the sprawling suburban house that used to be Charlotte's home, chaos was reigning. Derek Moore was running from room to room, throwing clothes into suitcases. The calm, arrogant man from the morning was gone. He was sweating his shirt, unbuttoned, his eyes darting around like a trapped rat. "Why isn't the transfer going through?" he shouted at his phone. "It says pending compliance, check. I authorized it." Sasha Miller was in the kitchen, feeding Sophie and Leo chicken nuggets. She looked less like a smug mistress and more like a woman realizing she had boarded the Titanic after it hit the iceberg. "Derek," Sasha called out. "Leo is crying. He wants his mum." "Tell him to shut up," Derek screamed from the top of the stairs. "We're going on a vacation. Tell him we're going to the beach." "I don't want to go to the beach," Leo yelled, throwing a nugget. "I want Mommy. You said she was sick. She is sick." Derek roared, stomping down the stairs with a suitcase. "She's crazy. That's why we have to leave." His phone buzzed. It was a text from the bank. "Alert. All accounts frozen per court order. Number 4459-B. Contact your legal representative. No, Derek whispered. No, no, no. He dialed Gavin O'Connell. The number you have reached is no longer in service. Derek stared at the phone. Gavin had disconnected. He was on his own. Derek. Sasha walked into the hallway, her arms crossed. My credit card just got declined for the Uber. You said you transferred money to my account. There's a glitch, Derek lied, grabbing his keys. Get the kids in the car. Now we have to get to O'Hare. I'm not going anywhere until you show me the money, Sasha said, her voice turning cold. You promised me a life, Derek. This looks like a felony. You want the money? Derek laughed hysterically. Get in the damn car, Sasha. If we miss this flight, there is no money. He grabbed Leo's arm, yanking the boy off the stool. Oh, Daddy, you're hurting me, Leo screamed. Get in the car, screech. The sound of tires tearing up the driveway stopped them all. Derek froze. He looked out the front window. It wasn't a taxi. It wasn't an Uber. It was a convoy. 2 black SUVs blocked the driveway. A police cruiser pulled onto the lawn, lights flashing. And right in the middle, the armored Maybach. Derek dropped Leo's arm. It's over, Sasha whispered. She backed away from him. I didn't know, she said to the empty room, practicing her alibi. I didn't know he was kidnapping them. The front door didn't open. It was kicked in. The lock splintered, and the door swung wide. 2 police officers entered, guns drawn but pointed at the floor. Derek Moore, the lead officer shouted. Step away from the children. Put your hands where I can see them. Behind the wall of blue uniforms, Charlotte walked in. She wasn't crying. She wasn't screaming. She walked with the grace of a queen entering a conquered city. Mommy. Sophie and Leo scrambled off the kitchen stools and ran to her. Charlotte dropped to her knees, opening her arms. The impact of their small bodies against hers was the only thing that kept her from collapsing. She buried her face in their hair, smelling the shampoo she had bought, feeling their hearts beat against hers. I've got you, she whispered, tears finally spilling onto her cheeks. Mummy's here. I've got you. Derek stood by the stairs, hands raised, trembling. He looked at Charlotte, then at the man standing in the doorway behind her. Robert Dalton didn't enter the house. He stood on the threshold, leaning on a cane he didn't need, watching the scene with cold satisfaction. Officer, Charlotte said, standing up, keeping her children behind her. She pointed a shaking finger at Derek. That man violated a court order and attempted to flee the jurisdiction with minors. I want to press charges. Charlotte, wait. Derek pleaded, his voice cracking. Please, think about the kids. You don't want their father in jail. Charlotte looked at him. She thought about the empty house, the frozen bank accounts, the smirk he gave her in the courtroom. You're right, she said. I don't want their father in jail. Derek let out a breath of relief. But you aren't a father, she continued, her voice hard as diamond. Fathers protect their children. You used them as pawns. She turned to the officer. Arrest him. Wait, Sasha, Derek yelled, turning to his mistress. Tell them we were just going on vacation. Sasha Miller looked at Derek, then at Charlotte. She saw the Maybach outside. She saw the police. She made a calculation. I tried to stop him, Sasha sobbed, putting on the performance of her life. Officer, he forced me. He said he'd hurt me if I didn't help him pack. He's crazy. You lying witch. Derek lunged at her. The officers tackled him. Derek Moore, the man who thought he held all the cards, was slammed face first into the hardwood floor he had insisted on refinishing last year. The handcuffs clicked a cold metallic sound of finality. As they dragged him out, kicking and screaming, he locked eyes with Robert Dalton. Robert simply checked his watch. Right on schedule, Robert murmured. Charlotte picked up Sophie and took Leo's hand. She walked out of the house, stepping over Derek's discarded suitcase. She didn't look back at the home she had spent 10 years building. It was just a building now. She walked to the Maybach. Robert opened the door for her. "Where are we going?" Leo asked, wiping his eyes. "Can we go home?" Charlotte looked at her father. Robert smiled, a genuine smile this time. "No, Leo," Robert said. "We're going to the Four Seasons, and tomorrow we're going shopping for a new house, a bigger one." Charlotte buckled the kids in. She sat back exhausted, the adrenaline fading into a deep, bone-weary ache. But her children were safe. "Thank you," she said to her father. "Don't thank me yet," Robert said, tapping the driver's partition. "We secured the kids. Now we secure the future. Tomorrow we start the forensic audit of his company." "His company?" Charlotte asked. "Derek is just a VP." "Not for long," Robert said. "I bought his company's debt yesterday afternoon. By Monday morning I'll be the majority shareholder, and I have some questions about his expense reports." Charlotte looked out the window as the convoy pulled away. The nightmare was over, but the reckoning had just begun. 3 weeks later, the snow in Chicago had turned to a grey, impenetrable sludge, much like Derek Moore's life. He had spent 2 nights in the Cook County jail before his mother, Linda, put up her house to cover his bail. The charges were serious: attempted parental kidnapping and violation of a court order, but Derek, ever the narcissist, convinced himself it was all a misunderstanding that a good lawyer could fix. But he couldn't afford a good lawyer. Gavin O'Connell had fled to the Hamptons, and every other firm in the city had mysteriously conflicted out of representing him. Derek's only lifeline was his job. He was the regional vice president of Vanguard Logistics. He brought in millions in revenue. They needed him. If he could just get back to the office, close the Q4 deal with the distributors, and get his bonus, he could fight back. He could hire a shark from New York to take down the Daltons. On Monday morning, Derek put on his last clean suit. The police had seized most of his wardrobe as potential evidence of flight risk and marched into the Vanguard headquarters in the Loop. He swiped his badge at the turnstile. Beep. Red light. Access denied. Must be a glitch, Derek muttered, sweat prickling his hairline. He walked over to the security desk. "Hey, Jerry, badge isn't working. Buzz me in." Jerry, a guard Derek had ignored for 5 years, didn't look up from his monitor. "Badge is deactivated, Mr. Moore. You're not cleared for entry." "I'm the vice president," Derek snapped. "Let me in or I'll have your job." "You can try." A voice came from the elevators. Derek turned. Standing there was the HR director, a woman named Patricia, who had always been terrified of him. Today she looked smug. "Mr. Moore," Patricia said, "you are required in the boardroom. Immediately. We have visitors." "Visitors?" Derek scoffed, straightening his tie. "Good. Maybe I can finally explain to the CEO how this company falls apart without me." He followed her up to the 40th floor. He strode down the hallway, regaining his confidence with every step. He was Derek Moore. He was a closer. He could talk his way out of anything. He pushed open the heavy glass doors of the boardroom. "Gentlemen, I apologize for the words died in his throat. The long oak table was occupied. But it wasn't the CEO, Mr. Henderson, sitting at the head. It was Charlotte. She was wearing a navy power suit that looked tailored to within an inch of its life. Her hair was sleek, her makeup flawless. She didn't look like the frazzled housewife he had left in the slush. She looked like a CAO. To her right sat Robert Dalton, idly peeling an orange with a pocket knife. To her left sat a team of forensic accountants, their laptops open, displaying complex spreadsheets. and in the corner, looking small and terrified, was Sasha Miller. "Sasha," Derek breathed. "What are you doing here?" "Sit down, Derek," Charlotte said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight he had never heard before. It was the Dalton voice. "You can't be here," Derek stammered, pointing at her. "This is Vanguard Logistics. Security. Mr. Henderson retired on Friday," Robert Dalton said without looking up from his orange. "Sold his majority stake to a private equity firm, Dalton Capital Partners." Robert tossed a piece of orange peel onto the polished table. "I own the company, Derek, which means I own your employment contract. And more interestingly, I own the results of the internal audit we conducted over the weekend." Derek felt his knees give way. He slumped into the nearest chair. "Audit." "You were sloppy, Derek," Charlotte said, sliding a thick file across the table. "You thought because you were bringing in revenue, no one would check the expense accounts, or the vendor kickbacks." She flipped the file open. "We found the shell company in Delaware. DM Consulting. You've been invoicing Vanguard for consulting services for 3 years, approving your own invoices. That was for legitimate market research." Derek lied, his voice high and thin. "We also found the payments to the travel agency," Charlotte continued, ignoring him. "First-class tickets to Cabo, the Ritz-Carlton in Maui, all listed as client development, but the passenger manifest lists only 2 names, Derek Moore and Sasha Miller." Charlotte looked at Sasha. "Ms. Miller has been very helpful this morning. In exchange for immunity from prosecution for corporate fraud, she walked us through exactly how you doctored the receipts." Derek stared at Sasha. She refused to meet his eyes, staring intently at her hands. "You traitor," Derek hissed. "I bought you everything." "With stolen money." Sasha snapped back, finally looking at him with tears in her eyes. "You told me you were rich. You told me it was your bonus. You made me an accomplice to embezzlement." "Enough." Robert Dalton slammed his hand on the table. The sound cracked like a whip. "Here is the situation." "Mr. Moore," Robert said, "we have enough evidence here to send you to federal prison for 10 years. Wire fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion." Derek was shaking violently now. "Please, Robert, Dad, we can work this out. I'll pay it back. I'll work for free." "I'm not your dad," Robert said coldly, "and I don't want your work." Charlotte stood up. She walked around the table until she was standing right next to Derek. She looked down at him, and for a moment she remembered the man she had loved. The man she thought was her partner. That man was dead. This was just a criminal in a cheap suit. "We are offering you a deal," Charlotte said. "Anything," Derek begged. "Anything." "Option A," Charlotte said, holding up a finger. "We hand this file to the FBI this afternoon. You go to prison. You never see the kids again. You rot." Derek swallowed hard. "And option B." Charlotte placed a single sheet of paper in front of him. "Option B, you sign this." Derek looked at the document. "Voluntary relinquishment of parental rights." "You sign over full legal and physical custody of Leo and Sophie to me," Charlotte said. "You agree to a permanent restraining order. You agree to leave the state of Illinois and never return. In exchange, Vanguard Logistics will decline to press criminal charges. We will fire you for performance reasons and seal the audit." "You want me to give up my kids?" Derek whispered. "You already gave them up," Charlotte said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "When you chose her, when you chose the money, when you tried to take them to Rio like they were luggage. If I sign this, I walk away." "You walk away with nothing," Robert corrected. "No money, no job, no reputation, but you walk away free. That is more mercy than you deserve." Derek looked at the paper. He looked at the accountants who were watching him with disgust. He looked at Sasha, who was looking at him with hatred. He realized then that he had no allies, no leverage, no cards left to play. He picked up the pen. His hand shook so much he could barely hold it. He signed. Charlotte snatched the paper away the moment the ink touched the page. She checked the signature, then nodded to her father. "Get him out of my sight," Charlotte said. "Security," Robert called out. 2 guards marched in and hauled Derek out of the chair. He didn't fight. He didn't speak. He looked like a hollow shell. As they dragged him to the elevator, he looked back one last time at Charlotte. She wasn't looking at him. She was already on the phone. "Yes, Dr. Evans, it's Charlotte. Yes, I'd like to schedule that therapy session for Leo, and we're going to need to update the school pickup list. Yes, just me. Only me." The elevator doors closed, severing Derek Moore from his past, his future, and his family. Robert stood up and walked over to his daughter. He placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did good, kid," he said softly. Charlotte took a deep breath. She felt lighter than she had in years. "Is it really over?" "The war is over," Robert said. "But now comes the hard part." "What's that?" "Rebuilding," Robert smiled. "And I have an idea about that. How would you like a job? A job here?" Charlotte looked around the boardroom. "No, not here. This company is a mess. I'm selling it for parts next week." Robert laughed. "I mean at Dalton Enterprises. I need someone to run the philanthropy division. Someone who knows what it's like to lose everything and survive." Charlotte smiled. For the first time, the future didn't look scary. It looked limitless. "I'd like that," she said. 2 years had passed since the day Derek Moore was escorted out of the Vanguard building. The Chicago skyline was as imposing as ever, but from the floor-to-ceiling windows of Charlotte's new office on the 55th floor of the Dalton Tower, it looked like a city of opportunities rather than a cage. Charlotte sat at her desk, reviewing the quarterly report for the Dalton Foundation. In the last 24 months, they had launched 3 new initiatives: a legal aid fund for victims of domestic financial abuse, a scholarship program for single mothers, and a housing grant for displaced families. She wasn't just signing checks. She was running the show. She had finished her MBA, a degree Derek had always told her was pointless for a mother, graduating top of her class. There was a knock on the door. "Come in," Charlotte called out. The door opened, and Leo ran in, followed closely by Sophie. Leo was 9 now, tall for his age, with his grandfather's sharp jawline, but his mother's kind eyes. Sophie at 6 was a whirlwind of energy in a pink tutu. "Mum, Grandpa said we can go to the aquarium," Leo shouted. Robert Dalton walked in behind them. He looked different. The hard edges of the Shark of Chicago had softened just a fraction. He was wearing a casual sweater instead of a suit, and he was holding 2 ice cream cones that were dangerously close to dripping on the Persian rug. "I said we might go to the aquarium," Robert corrected, winking at Charlotte. "If your mother says the quarterly review is done." Charlotte smiled, closing her laptop. "The review is done. Numbers are up 15%. We're expanding the shelter program to 3 more states." "Good." Robert nodded, handing Sophie a cone. "You have a knack for this, Charlie. Better than I ever did. I just knew how to make money. You know how to make it matter." It was the highest compliment he could give. "What about him?" Robert asked quietly, his voice dropping so the kids wouldn't hear. Charlotte knew who he meant. She opened a drawer and pulled out a single postcard. It had no return address, just a postmark from a small town in North Dakota. It read, "I'm sorry." That was it. No request for money. No excuses. Just 2 words that came 3 years too late. He's working at a hardware store in Bismarck, Charlotte said. Minimum wage, living in a studio apartment. He sends $50 a month in child support. I put it in a savings account for the kids. Do you want me to intervene? Robert asked, a familiar, dangerous glint in his eye. No. Charlotte shook her head. Let him be. He's serving his sentence. He has to live every day knowing what he threw away. That's punishment enough. She looked at her children. Leo was showing Sophie a video on his tablet, both of them laughing. They were happy. They were safe. They barely remembered the shouting, the fear the night they were taken. Besides, Charlotte stood up, grabbing her purse. I don't have time for the past. I have a date. A date, Robert raised an eyebrow. With the architect. With the architect, Charlotte grinned. He's designing the new wing of the children's hospital. And he actually listens when I talk. Well, Robert sighed, feigning annoyance but smiling. I suppose I'm on babysitting duty then. Come on, you monsters. Let's go look at some sharks. Yeah, sharks, Sophie yelled. Charlotte walked them to the elevator. As the doors opened, she paused. She looked at her reflection in the polished brass. She didn't see a victim anymore. She didn't see a discarded wife. She saw Charlotte Dalton, mother, CEO, survivor. She kissed her father on the cheek. Thanks, Dad. For the babysitting. For everything. Robert cleared his throat, looking away to hide the emotion in his eyes. Go, don't be late. The elevator doors closed, taking her family down to the lobby. Charlotte turned and walked back toward her office, her heels clicking rhythmically on the marble floor. The sun was setting over Chicago, painting the city in gold and fire. She picked up her phone and dialed the architect. Hey, she said, her voice full of light. I'm on my way. The nightmare was over. The dream had just begun. And that is how Charlotte didn't just survive, she thrived. Derek thought he could break her by taking her money and her children, but he forgot that a mother's love is the most dangerous force on earth, especially when backed by a billion-dollar empire. He lost his family, his career, and his dignity, while Charlotte built a legacy from the ashes of his betrayal. It's a reminder that sometimes the people who try to bury us don't realize we are seeds. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. And tell me in the comments, do you think Derek got off too easy or was living with his regret the ultimate punishment? Thanks for watching.